He never made headlines for scandals. He never stormed off set. He never shouted into a megaphone or demanded attention. And yet, when Richard Widmark walked onto a soundstage, people stopped talking. Not because he was famous, but because he was focused. Widmark wasn't Hollywood's loudest legend, but he might have been its most quietly unforgiving. For decades, he kept his thoughts to himself, until, over time, those closest to him began to piece together a list, a quiet judgment, passed not by tabloids, but by a man who believed deeply in respect, discipline, and knowing the difference between talent and ego. And on that list, 5 of the most famous names in the business. 5 stars who, in Widmark's eyes, broke the unspoken code of acting. This is the story of Richard Widmark and the 5 actors he couldn't stand. Before he ever pushed an old woman down a staircase on screen, before he became Hollywood's go-to villain, Richard Widmark was just a sharp-eyed kid from Sunrise, Minnesota. The son of a traveling salesman and a movie-loving Scottish grandmother, Richard's earliest memories included watching cowboy flicks at the local theater 2 or 3 times a week. That love for cinema grew quietly but steadily. By the time the family settled in Princeton, Illinois, Widmark had become a star in the classroom and on the football field. He was even class president. But the greatest shift came in college, when he gave up law school dreams to chase the stage. He didn't shout about it. He didn't grandstand. He just acted. At Lake Forest College, he met Jean Hazelwood, a fellow drama student who would become his wife, his collaborator, and his lifelong partner. They married in 1942 and stayed married for 55 years. In a town famous for betrayals, theirs was a rare exception, unbreakable, scandal-free, and real. In 1947, Widmark made his film debut in Kiss of Death. It was a role no one thought he could handle. He had a high forehead, a thoughtful face, more philosopher than killer. But as Tommy Udo, Widmark unleashed a performance so chilling, so shocking, that audiences were genuinely frightened. His infamous laugh, delivered while pushing an old woman in a wheelchair down a flight of stairs, became an instant Hollywood legend. He earned an Oscar nomination for his first role, a Golden Globe, a studio contract, and, most importantly, a reputation. A reputation for precision, for respect, for never showing up unprepared. Widmark saw acting as a duty, to the audience, to the story, and to the people standing next to you in the scene. He wasn't just there to perform. He was there to serve something bigger than himself. Which is why, when someone treated acting like a joke, he didn't forget it. He never called them out by name in interviews. He didn't have to. Word got around. If you asked people who worked with Widmark, they'd tell you. He hated ego. He had no time for laziness. And nothing offended him more than actors who thought their fame mattered more than their craft. He believed in arriving on time. Knowing your lines, respecting your co-stars. Whether you were shooting a Western on a dusty backlot or filming a courtroom drama with Sidney Poitier, he showed up like it mattered. And he expected everyone else to do the same. When they didn't, Widmark remembered. 1. Frank Sinatra. To the public, Frank Sinatra was a legend. A singer, a crooner, a heartbreaker. But to Richard Widmark, he was something else entirely. In 1968, the two worked together on The Detective. It was a film with promise, but behind the scenes things were anything but smooth. Sinatra showed up late. He breezed through scenes. He wanted everything done fast, with as few takes as possible. That approach clashed violently with Widmark's discipline. A crew member remembered, Richard felt Frank was all charm and no dedication. To Widmark, acting was sacred. To Sinatra, it looked like just another gig between concerts. And for a man who took the craft so seriously, that kind of attitude was unforgivable. 2. Marlon Brando. They never shared the screen, but that didn't mean Widmark didn't form an opinion. He respected Brando's raw talent. He even called him brilliant in passing. But everything else? The forgetfulness, the mumbling, the method acting madness. Widmark wanted no part of it. Brando was infamous for improvising lines, refusing rehearsals, and treating structure like a cage. To Widmark, that wasn't creative. It was selfish. Some actors need chaos to create. I prefer focus, he once said. It was never confirmed who he was talking about, but no one doubted it was aimed at Brando. 3. Tony Curtis. The two co-starred in The Longships in 1964. But even during filming, Widmark reportedly kept his distance. Tony Curtis was Hollywood's pretty boy, known for his matinee idol looks and flamboyant lifestyle. On set, he spent more time perfecting his reflection than his lines. He treated the set like a runway, one observer said. Widmark came to work. Curtis came to pose. Richard didn't hate Curtis for who he was, but for who he tried to be. All surface, no soul. In a business built on illusion, Widmark could spot a hollow performance from a mile away. 4. Robert Mitchum. Mitchum was the anti-star. Cool, dry, effortlessly rebellious. He bragged that he never rehearsed, never prepared. I just show up, hit my mark, and say the lines, he famously said. To millions, that made him a legend. To Widmark, it made him a joke. You don't coast your way to greatness, he once muttered, after watching Mitchum phone in another performance. Widmark didn't mind subtlety, but he hated laziness dressed up as style. 5. Kirk Douglas. Now this one surprised even his friends. On paper, Kirk Douglas and Richard Widmark should have been allies, both intense, both commanding, both fiercely committed to their roles. But maybe that was the problem. Douglas wasn't just intense, he was overpowering. He took up space. He stole scenes. His voice, his gestures, his energy, it overwhelmed everything around him. There's only room for one storm in a scene, Widmark reportedly said, turning down a major role alongside Douglas. And Kirk brings the whole hurricane. To Widmark, acting was about collaboration. Douglas, in his view, made it a contest. Not everyone disappointed him. In fact, one co-star earned Widmark's lifelong respect, Sidney Poitier. They met on No Way Out, where Widmark played a brutal racist opposite Poitier's calm, dignified doctor. The material was raw. The tension was real. But off camera, they became friends. Every day, after delivering his lines, Widmark would turn to Poitier and quietly say, "You know this is just acting, right?" Poitier always smiled. "I get it, Dick. I'm an actor too." Years later, Poitier revealed something else. Richard Widmark was the first person in Hollywood to ever invite him to dinner. In his final decades, Widmark left Hollywood behind. He lived quietly on a Connecticut ranch, raised his daughter, and cared for Jean as she battled Alzheimer's. He gave up acting to stay by her side, only returning once for a brief role in True Colors, just to keep a promise. When Jean passed in 1997, Widmark sold the ranch. "Without her, it's not home," he said. In 2008, at age 93, Richard Widmark passed away peacefully. No scandal, no spotlight, just silence. But those who knew him, really knew him, remembered something else. A quiet man with a sharp memory and a sharper sense of justice. Richard Widmark never shouted into the wind, but he remembered every storm. He didn't blacklist, he didn't gossip. He simply acted and expected others to do the same. In a world of fame and facades, Widmark was something rare, steady, focused, unshakable. He didn't need the last word. His work said enough.